"You're terminated, Ms. Monroe. Leave your badge and keys on the table." The words hit like a gunshot through the emergency room, silencing the nurses, techs, and even the patients waiting in triage. Less than 12 hours earlier, Dr. Camille Monroe had been halfway down a rocky hiking trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains when she spotted a man lying motionless near a ravine, bloodied, barely breathing, and clearly in critical condition. With no cell service and no time to wait, she carried him on her back for nearly 2 miles to reach help. She had no idea who he was. No ID, no wallet, not even a name. All she knew was that he would die if she did nothing. And now, after risking her own safety and going against hospital protocol to get him emergency care, Camille was being publicly humiliated and fired in front of everyone at Prescott Medical Center. The man's life had been saved, but Camille's was about to be turned completely upside down. The night had been long, and Camille's arms trembled from the weight of the man she had hauled down the mountain. Her boots were caked in mud, her scrubs torn at the sleeves, and her breath came in uneven gasps by the time she finally burst through the side entrance of Prescott Medical Center with the unconscious man slung across her back. "We need a trauma team now," she shouted to the few night shift staff who looked up in stunned silence. The man's skin was pale, his pulse barely there. Without hesitation, she began basic CPR and called for oxygen. But instead of assistance, Camille was met with narrowed eyes and hesitant stares. "Who is he?" asked one of the nurses. "Where's his insurance card?" came another voice. She ignored them, directing a young resident to prep Trauma Bay 2 and call in Dr. Lansing from the on-call list. By the time the team finally moved into action, precious minutes had been lost to protocol talk and hesitation. The man was stabilized, placed under observation, and by dawn he had been moved to a private room. Still unconscious, still unidentified, but alive. Camille didn't sleep. She showered quickly, changed into clean scrubs, and reported back for her morning shift, unaware that a storm had already begun brewing behind closed doors. By 8:15 a.m., she was summoned to the main administration office. Dr. Kenneth Braxton, the hospital's managing director, stood behind the front desk with 2 members of HR and a hospital security guard, flanking him like a scene out of a courtroom drama. "Dr. Monroe," Braxton began, voice sharp and clipped, "you knowingly violated hospital policy by using emergency resources on an individual with no verified identity, no proof of insurance, and no pre-authorization. That is a direct breach of Summit Ridge Protocol Section 8.3. Camille's jaw clenched. "He was dying," she replied firmly. "There was no time." But Braxton was unmoved. "You diverted resources from paying patients. You bypassed intake procedures. You acted on your own authority without permission." Camille's co-workers had started gathering by the glass walls of the admin suite, watching in stunned silence. Some looked away. Others, including nurses she had mentored for years, whispered behind cupped hands. Braxton's voice grew louder as he waved a file in her face. "This is not your wilderness clinic, Dr. Monroe. This is a private medical institution with legal and financial obligations. You put this hospital at risk with your reckless behavior." Before she could respond, he slammed the folder on the desk and gestured to the security guard. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Leave your badge and keys. You are no longer authorized to enter any patient areas." The words stung more than she expected, not because they were a surprise. Deep down, she'd felt this coming, but because of the casual cruelty in his tone. She had worked here for over a decade, through night shifts, pandemics, and staff shortages, always doing the right thing even when it was the hard thing. And now she was being discarded like a liability. Camille removed her ID badge, her access key, and laid them gently on the desk. As she turned to leave, the security guard, Johnson, a man who had always greeted her warmly in the mornings, looked away. The hall was dead silent as she walked through the same corridors where she had once saved lives. No thank you, no handshake, no dignity. Just a woman who had done the right thing and was punished for it. That night, Camille sat in her modest kitchen, still in shock from the morning's humiliation. Her scrubs were folded in a laundry basket beside her, and the teacup in her hand trembled slightly as the events of the day replayed in her mind like a cruel montage. Then came the knock, No doorbell, just a single knock, deliberate, heavy. She opened the door to find no one on the porch, only a large manila envelope resting on the welcome mat. There was no return address, no markings, nothing to indicate who had sent it. Inside was a single printed photo, a high-resolution shot of her, mid-action, kneeling on the Rocky Mountain Trail with the injured man cradled in her lap, her jacket covering his chest, her hands pressed against his wounds. Written in black ink across the bottom was one line: "Thank you. Everything is about to change." Her heart pounded. Someone had been watching, someone had followed her, or perhaps someone important had survived because of her. She barely slept, pacing the floors in silence as the message repeated in her head. The next morning, just after sunrise, the sound of thundering rotors split the sky above her quiet Georgia neighborhood. Camille rushed to the window and dropped her coffee cup as two massive army helicopters descended into the open field behind her backyard. Neighbors emerged from their homes in confusion and awe, cell phones raised to record. Camille stepped onto her porch barefoot, her pulse racing as the doors of the nearest helicopter opened and two men stepped out. The first wore the sharply pressed uniform of a four-star general, General Langston Rivera, head of U.S. Army Special Operations Command, a man whose face she recognized from televised briefings and national security press conferences. The second man, tall, wearing a tailored black jacket and aviator sunglasses, approached with purposeful calm. "Dr. Camille Monroe?" he asked, removing his shades to reveal striking grey eyes and a familiar face, though one now clean-shaven, groomed and restored. Camille stared in disbelief. It was him. The man from the mountain. The man whose blood had stained her jacket, whose heartbeat had nearly faded in her arms. "My name is Nolan Devereaux," he said, extending his hand. "You saved my life." As they sat down at her kitchen table moments later, flanked by two quiet aides and a mobile communications officer, Camille learned the full truth. Nolan wasn't just any man. He was the CEO of Devereaux Defense Systems, one of the most powerful defense contractors in the country. A billionaire with deep ties to U.S. intelligence and military operations. But more than that, he had been conducting an unsanctioned solo survival training exercise in the Appalachian Highlands, a tradition among elite operatives and strategists to test endurance and clarity under pressure. Somewhere along the route, a rock slide had caused his fall. His comms gear was destroyed, his GPS shattered, and his condition rapidly declined. "Had you not acted," General Rivera said solemnly, "we wouldn't just have lost a man. We'd have lost the primary strategist of our nation's next defense program." Camille's head swirled. Just 24 hours ago, she'd been fired for saving him. Now she was sitting across from two of the most powerful men in the country, one of whom owed her his life. The absurdity and gravity of it all landed at once. Her world hadn't just changed, it had been split wide open. 2 days later, Camille found herself seated inside a high-security conference room at Fort McAllister, a classified military base tucked away in the Georgia pines. The sterile room hummed with quiet tension as Nolan Devereaux tapped a password into a secured tablet and turned it toward her. "There's something you need to see," he said, his tone no longer just grateful, but grim. The screen lit up with a series of confidential hospital emails, spreadsheets, and internal memos, all pulled from a backdoor surveillance audit initiated by Nolan's cybersecurity division shortly after his recovery. Camille scrolled through the files in disbelief. There, in plain language, were instructions from Dr. Kenneth Braxton to department heads at Prescott Medical Center. Prioritize patients with platinum tier coverage. Delay or redirect those without verifiable insurance. A bulleted list followed, categorized by ZIP code, ethnicity, and insurance provider. Minimize intake of high-risk, low-return demographics, one line read. Another memo labeled Native American and Black patients as statistical liabilities. Camille's hands shook. "This is illegal," she whispered. Nolan nodded. "It gets worse." With a swipe, he revealed a diagram of the hospital's AI-powered patient intake system, marketed as an efficiency tool but functioning as something far darker. For the past 18 months, Braxton had secretly implemented facial recognition software across all ER surveillance cameras. It didn't just record footage. It cross-referenced facial features with credit history, social media data, and third-party demographic analytics to pre-categorize patients by economic value, assigning a risk score to each person who walked through the door. Those who scored below a certain threshold, primarily Black, Latino, and uninsured patients, were quietly redirected to county hospitals or left waiting for hours until they left voluntarily. One flagged message even praised staff for a successful week with minimal low-value admits. Camille stared at the screen in horror. "So that's why the waiting room was always full of people who never got past triage," she murmured. Nolan leaned in. "They were profiling in real time, Camille, and they used that data to decide who was worth saving." Further documents showed that Prescott had accepted over $12 million in tax-exempt federal aid meant for low-income patient outreach, money that was instead funneled into private development projects, executive bonuses, and campaign donations to local officials. "It's medical redlining," Nolan said bluntly, "and you're firing." That wasn't about a policy breach, it was a cover-up. You broke their system by saving someone they thought wasn't worth the risk. Camille's mind reeled. Every face she'd seen in that ER waiting room, every unanswered plea, every delayed diagnosis, was part of a calculated pattern. She'd sensed the bias for years, but this was proof, hard, undeniable, and devastating. And now, with Nolan's influence and military backing, she had the chance to expose it all. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Nolan looked her in the eye. "We bring the entire system down." Within 3 weeks, the storm Camille had unknowingly triggered turned into a full-scale reckoning. Nolan Devereaux, using both his influence in defense circles and his company's vast legal network, coordinated with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the Department of Health and Human Services, and a handful of key media outlets to launch a sweeping federal investigation into Prescott Medical Center. Anonymous whistleblowers came forward, leaked files circulated in encrypted forums, and on the morning of the National Healthcare Equity Summit in Washington, D.C., Nolan took the stage to present the findings to a room packed with doctors, legislators, hospital executives, and cameras from every major network. "We stand today," he began, "at the intersection of innovation and injustice. What I'm about to show you is not a failure of technology, but of morality." With a tap on his tablet, the screens behind him lit up with a carefully sequenced presentation. Internal emails from Braxton encouraging racial profiling, facial recognition algorithms categorizing patients by profit likelihood, and financial documents outlining the redirection of federal grant money to private real estate projects and campaign contributions. Audible gasps echoed across the ballroom. Journalists scrambled to capture every slide. Doctors in the audience shook their heads in disbelief. Then came the moment no one saw coming. As Nolan closed his keynote address, the side doors to the ballroom swung open and FBI agents entered in formation. At the center of the room, Dr. Kenneth Braxton, seated among invited guests, turned white as agents approached. "Dr. Braxton," one agent said firmly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, violation of the Civil Rights Act, and embezzlement of federal funds." Handcuffs clicked around his wrists as hundreds of cameras flashed simultaneously. He was walked out past colleagues and investors, his legacy crumbling with every step. The footage aired live on every major network that evening, sparking a nationwide conversation about medical discrimination and the misuse of AI in patient care. But the real surprise came an hour later, during a follow-up press briefing held by Nolan. Standing beside Camille Monroe, now dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer and looking every bit the dignified professional she had always been, Nolan stepped aside and made the announcement that stunned the nation. "Effective immediately," he said, "Devereaux Defense Systems has acquired all assets of Prescott Medical Center. The facility will be restructured, rebranded, and reopened as the Camille Monroe Institute for Human-Centered Medicine." The crowd erupted into applause. News outlets across the country ran the headline within minutes. "Fired Black Doctor becomes face of national healthcare reform." But Nolan wasn't finished. "Dr. Monroe will serve as our new chief medical officer," he continued, tasked with leading a groundbreaking national initiative focused on equity, ethics, and access in emergency healthcare. Camille stepped to the podium, her voice strong but humble. "I didn't save that man for recognition," she said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. And today I stand here not just for myself, but for every patient turned away and every provider silenced for choosing compassion over policy." The room gave her a standing ovation. At that moment, it became clear Camille's name wouldn't just mark a building, it would represent a movement, and the system that once cast her out was now being rebuilt in her image. Camille adjusted the collar of her new lab coat as the automatic doors of the hospital lobby slid open before her. Sunlight poured through the skylights of what was once Prescott Medical Center, now gleaming with a new name etched into brushed steel above the reception desk: the Camille Monroe Institute for Human-Centered Medicine. Staff members lined the halls, not with hesitant glances or whispered judgments this time, but with applause, smiles, and outstretched hands. News crews followed discreetly behind, documenting every step of the woman who had once been cast out as a scapegoat, but had returned as a symbol of national healing. The same corridor where security had once escorted her out now featured framed photographs of her mountain rescue efforts, a timeline of medical ethics reforms, and quotes about compassion and courage. Patients from all walks of life, insured or not, waited in a vibrant, welcoming space that no longer judged by credit score, race, or insurance policy, but by urgency and humanity. Camille paused near the main desk, greeted by Johnson, the former security guard now promoted to Director of Safety, who offered a quiet nod of respect. On the wall behind him hung a plaque inscribed with the mission statement she had helped write: "Every life, equal value." The transformation was undeniable. From the protocols to the personnel, from the leadership to the core values, the hospital had been reborn, not just in name, but in spirit. Children played near the reception area, multilingual signs adorned every wing, and newly hired staff from underserved communities walked the halls with pride. Dr. Camille Monroe had become more than a physician. She was now a pioneer of a new era in healthcare. But amid all the celebration, what struck her most was the silence, the absence of fear, shame, or bureaucracy. In that moment, she knew this was no longer just a place of medicine. It was a sanctuary of dignity. There is a lesson buried within every injustice, sometimes quiet, sometimes roaring, but always waiting to be heard. Camille's story reminds us that doing the right thing often comes at a cost. It may mean losing your job, your reputation, or your sense of security. It may mean being called insubordinate, reckless, or unprofessional. In a world that often values compliance over conscience, integrity can be seen as a liability. But the truth is, when you stand your ground with courage and compassion, even in the face of towering institutions, the impact echoes far beyond the moment. Camille didn't save that man for recognition or reward. She saved him because his life mattered, and because she couldn't stand by while others hesitated. Her refusal to compromise her ethics cost her everything, until the truth landed, quite literally, in her backyard, carried on the blades of 2 Army helicopters. In American culture, we often celebrate comeback stories. But Camille's isn't just a comeback, it's a transformation. A reminder that sometimes the universe doesn't punish you for doing the right thing. It repositions you. The real measure of success isn't how high you rise within a broken system, but how bravely you stand when that system turns against you. And when the time is right, when justice finally catches up to principle, it doesn't whisper. It arrives loudly, in headlines, in courtrooms, and in the hearts of those who are watching all along. So the next time you're faced with a moment of moral clarity, remember this: the right choice may cost you something today, but it could be building a legacy that changes everything tomorrow. Because when you lead with integrity, the truth always lands, even if it has to come by helicopter. And that's the incredible story of Dr. Camille Monroe, a woman who stood up for what was right, lost everything, and still came out on top by rewriting the future of American healthcare. Her courage reminds us that integrity may not always be rewarded immediately, but it never goes unnoticed. If her story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe a little more in justice, then you're exactly the kind of person we created this channel for. At X Daily Stories, we bring you powerful, true-to-life stories of resilience, redemption, and poetic justice. Stories that don't just entertain, but matter. We dig deep into the human spirit and shine a spotlight on moments that prove good people still exist, and that doing the right thing is always worth it. So if you want more stories that restore your faith in humanity and leave you feeling empowered, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our growing community of everyday heroes and believers. This is X Daily Stories, where every story has a voice and every voice has the power to change the world. See you in the next one.